Hi, I'm Neil with Auto, and today is Fix It Friday, so I'm going to show you how to service the transmission fluid in a 4L80E transmission. This transmission is found in a number of GM vehicles, including this 2007 Chevrolet Express. Even though many revisions to this transmission have been made since it came out in 1991, most, if not all variants, should use the same transmission pan gasket. However, the filter part number will vary by model year. The first step is to check the transmission fluid level. You will want to do this with the vehicle parked on a level surface with the engine running. The location and accessibility of the dipstick will vary by vehicle, but it is usually marked with a gear symbol. The level in this transmission looks good, however, the color indicates that it is dirty and needs to be changed. Transmission fluid that is still good will have a pinkish purplish color on both the dipstick and a rag. Since this particular vehicle does not have a drain plug on the transmission pan, I'm going to show you 3 different ways you can remove the fluid, 2 of which will require an evacuation tool like this one. The first is to use the dipstick to measure a length of tubing, which you can then insert directly into the dipstick tube. This method, however, does not always work, as I encountered here. This is likely due to the fact that this dipstick tube is made of multiple pieces of tube that connect together, and also because there are multiple bends to route through this weird engine bay. The next method is a little bit messier, but is probably the easiest to do if you don't have a fluid evacuation tool. Start by removing the bolts at the front half of the transmission pan. Then remove the remaining bolts about halfway. The idea here is to break the seal on the gasket and have the front half of the pan drop lower than the back. Be sure to have a drain pan over the front half of the transmission pan, and you will definitely want something to cover the ground. The pan should begin to separate from the transmission as you loosen bolts. Remember, this method will not completely drain the pan, so when you go to remove the remaining bolts, be ready to catch the remaining weight of the transmission fluid, while also keeping the pan level. The third method involves removing the dipstick tube, as I did here, and inserting the evacuation tool directly into the transmission. Once the tube is submerged in the transmission fluid, it can be extracted. Now the pan is empty enough that it can easily be lowered. Be cautious around hot exhaust if the vehicle was recently running. Once the pan is unbolted, be sure to keep it upright, as there is most likely still fluid in the pan. Fluid will continue to drip from the inside of the transmission, so you'll want to have a drain pan handy. This stuff is incredibly slippery and will make a mess in no time. Next, you'll want to go ahead and remove your transmission filter, and you'll want to pull it straight down from the corner that attaches to the intake port. Otherwise, this will happen. Lucky for me, a big enough piece broke off that I just had to simply twist off the remaining piece of plastic. Next, we're going to drain the pan here and take a look at the magnet, which can tell you a lot about the condition and health of your transmission. It is completely normal to see some fine magnetic particles on the magnet. However, anything larger than these may indicate that there is a problem with your transmission. Be sure to completely clean the magnet and pan so that the next time the transmission is serviced, it'll be easier to spot any potential wear within the transmission. It's actually not a bad idea to remove the gasket before cleaning the pan, but I did things a little backwards here. You'll just want to go ahead and clean that gasket mating surface as best you can. When clean, the mating surfaces should be completely smooth to the touch. The gasket shown is actually a reusable style gasket. However, I went and played it safe and ordered a new gasket because you never know what's going to happen when you peel these gaskets off. The rubber could be fatigued, or there could be some problem with the gasket that I think it's just safer to go ahead and replace the whole thing. Now, if you really need to put the transmission back together and you can't get a new gasket in time, and it is one of these reusable style ones, you can reuse it. Just be sure to thoroughly inspect it for any damage and wipe it down so that it seals properly. Next, we're going to replace the transmission filter seal, and I'm just going to use a flathead screwdriver and a hammer here to bend in the metal ring. And then use pliers to twist the metal ring inward, which will make removal possible. Once the old one's out, you can go ahead and line the new one up, and then very, very gently just tap it with a hammer to massage it into place. Now you can install your new filter, and that should slide right in and suspend itself in place. Now you can assemble your gasket and pan assembly onto the transmission. The important part about any kind of pan installation is that you work from the inner edge bolts to the outer corner bolts. This will ensure that the gasket installs as evenly as possible. The bolts should be torqued to about 18 foot-pounds. If you don't have a torque wrench that goes this low, you'll want to torque them snug but not too tight. Next, we'll clean the pan of any residue so that when we fill the transmission, we'll know if there are any leaks. In most instances, you can fill the transmission through the dipstick tube. However, I discovered that this transmission's dipstick tube has a leak, so I'm going to instead directly fill the transmission the same way that I extracted the fluid earlier. For this method, you will need a fluid pump, but if you're using the dipstick tube, you can just use a funnel. Once the transmission has been refilled to its service capacity, go ahead and start the engine and cycle through all the gears on your shift lever. This will help the fluid that you just replaced make its way into the solenoids and other parts of the transmission. It's not uncommon for the transmission to take a few extra seconds to go into gear the first time after a fluid change. However, if the vehicle does not go into gear after a prolonged amount of time, turn off the engine and make sure that enough fluid was added to the transmission. Once the engine is up to temperature, go ahead and check the fluid level on the dipstick. This should be done with the engine running and the transmission in park. If you filled the transmission using the dipstick, it may be difficult to get an accurate reading for some time after, as some transmission fluid may line the dipstick. As you can see here, I ultimately got an accurate reading, and it looks like we're right within the hot operating range, maybe a tiny bit over, but that's okay. Once you've determined that the fluid level is within operating specification, it's never a bad idea to take the vehicle for a test drive. Once you return from the test drive, you will want to check the fluid again and make any necessary adjustments. And that's how to change the transmission fluid and filter on your 4L80E or 4L85E transmission. Thanks for watching. We hope this video was super helpful. If you have any questions, be sure to leave a comment, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us get our content out there so we can keep helping you guys. And as always, happy motoring!